as the best things always are, I think. I'd prefer an organic kind of conversation than anything too scripted. Okay. Let me just, the best things always. Yeah, no, okay. Okay, so we're filtering in there on YouTube, I see. I'll talk to the audience and I'll talk to you at home. Thank you everyone for joining us at the Irish American Heritage Museum. We're doing one of our famed hybrid events, so it's always a little bit of a nightmare technologically because the lighting in here has to suit the people at home, but it also has to suit the people in here, so it's difficult. We're delighted to have with us poet, raconteur, translator, scholar, bon vivant, I don't know what else to call you, Gabriel Fitzmaurice. I've known him for years. He was a teacher in a small town village near where I grew up. I was in the small town, you were in the village. And famously, I entered a writing competition that he was a judge for, that Louvain, we'll talk about it later on maybe, were involved in, and he accepted my story. So that was the beginning of my creativity. And delighted to have him, a fellow Kerryman. We've been doing the pub theatre at John B's for years. Of course, I am only there sporadically, but Gabriel is a mainstay there. So delighted to have him. Thank you to everyone for coming out tonight. And we're just going to have kind of an informal conversation. I'm going to ask him a few questions. We were up at Skidmore University last night where we had a more, sort of academic panel about contemporary Ireland and how everything is changing and whether it's changing for the better or too fast or too slow. But tonight, I think we'll kind of concentrate more on writing and creativity with a sort of a focus on Kerry, of course. But we'll talk about, Gabriel has basically met every Irish writer that was alive in his lifetime. So, the conversation will be wide ranging, and then he'll read some of his work. So I'm delighted to have him, and thank you all for joining. And welcome, Gabriel. Good. So I suppose the first question I should ask you, I was saying you were a teacher. Were you always drawn to writing, or, what brought you to your love of language? Because I know you're a translator too, from Irish into English.
Oh, from the time I was a nipper, very young, I was reared to literature. My mother had a very good education. Unlike most people, she was born in 1918. Most Irish people born in 1918 finished their education at primary level. They would have gone on to maybe 14 years of age. No high school for them, certainly no college. My mother had a good education, unlike my father, although he learned fast. And basically, she was very interested in literature. She had a bad heart. She had, what do you call it? No, as a kid, she had anyway, it damaged. No, I'm thinking now. No, anyway, it doesn't matter. It damaged this condition.
The fever thing that damaged your heart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And anyway, her mitral valve was bad, and she had an operation on it. When I was born in 1952, but 1955 she had an operation on it, and that kind of steadied things for a while. But after a while, she had to retire to the bed while my father ran the grocery business and ran the kitchen and all the rest. But my mother was very interested in books, and she read for me before I could read myself. And she wasn't reading rubbish. She was reading children's edition of Dickens and Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer and Little Women, all that kind of stuff, the women's stuff as well as the men's stuff. And I was hooked in it. I was pretty handy at school, but maybe not the most motivated of students. So she made sure that I stayed with the books. We had a small little grocery store in my van, a small village outside of the Stove, which is the capital town of North Kerry. And there were 14 grocery stores in my van at the time. There's now only one supermarket there. So my mother knew very well there'd be no living for me as a grocer in my van when I was, when I grew up. So she asked me when I was in high school what I'd like to be. And of course, I had no idea. But I was very interested in the short stories of Frank O'Connor, a great Irish short story writer. And he had been a librarian. So I thought I'd like to be a librarian. So my mother said, you could never be a librarian because you'd never shut your mouth. So anyway, she said, you'll be a teacher. So I said, yes, mother, I'll be a teacher. So I'm glad she made that choice for me, because it gave me all the space and time to learn about myself with and through the children, and to learn about the children as well. Teaching is a great profession in the liberal arts, because in Ireland, in my time, and they still do, primary teachers teach the whole spectrum. They teach the Gaelic language, which we call Irish. They teach English. They teach mathematics. They teach history. They teach geography. They teach physical education. They teach science. They teach religion, etc., etc. And it's a great way of broadening your own education, because you can learn with the children and you can learn through them. Now, the other thing about interest in language was, you know about John Moriarty, and maybe some people listening in will know about John Moriarty. John Moriarty was a great philosopher and writer, and he came from my village. He was older than I am. He's dead now. But he and my mother used to have literary conversations. He'd come into my mother's bedroom. My mother was confined to the bed, and they would discuss the high points of literature. And here would I be at 3 and 4 and 5 years of age with my mouth open, listening to all these big words and fascinated by them. And I wanted to be that. And that's where the desire to be a writer came from, and that's how I became a teacher.
It's funny that they're intertwined, isn't it? Like
They
the
are.
teaching is a giving sort of thing, you know?
Yeah.
And so I suppose, I mean, I've a lot of questions for you, but one of the things that struck me, and last night too, while we were talking, the difference between maybe rural and urban writers in Ireland. And we talked last night about, you know, John B Keane and Brendan Kennelly, Patrick Kavanagh up in Monaghan, and then people like Joyce, who were nearly not of Ireland. You know, I mean, he had to really kind of go away to come into himself, although he loved, of course, Dublin. And
He did.
So can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what is the difference for rural and urban writers at home? Small questions.
The urban writers seem to be more easy to fit into a canon. A canon of Irish writing, a notion of what Irish writing is. Declan Khyber, the great critic and English teacher, English professor, has written about the Listowel writers. That's who we are. The John B Keanes and the Brian McMahons and the John Moriartys and the Brendan Kennellys and the Mary Kennellys and the Sonia Brodericks. We are difficult to put into a notion of a canon of Irish writing. It's not that we're inferior. That's what I'm saying anyway. But it's that we're just different. We grew up out of the soil. Even if we're born in a town or not out actually physically on a farm, you're very dominated by the ebb and flow of nature. When I was growing up in my van, the little village, the farmers, almost 200 of them, would come in every day. It was dairy farming, milk. They would come in every day to the creamery with their horses and carts, or their donkeys and carts. No tractors that time. And the whole village would be taken up with these people coming in. Now, of course, there are only 71 suppliers to the creamery, of which only 3 come in physically with their own milk. It's collected from them on the farm. But we grew up with the rhythms of farming and the rhythms of town life. And in a small, I know that communities happen in cities as well, don't get me wrong, but the community in a village is different. I take a positive view of it. That there's a phrase in Irish which says, "A sca, a céile, a varanadina." People depend on themselves. It literally means people exist in each other's shadows. Now, there's a famous novel that was written back in the 50s, I think, called The Valley of the Squinting Windows. And it talks about the downside of that type of intimate rural community life, where people are forever putting back the curtains, looking out, look what he's doing, look at what she's doing, oh my God, isn't that dreadful? That kind of thing. That can happen as well. But when you get the synthesis of both, of the notion that everybody knows everybody, that everybody cares for everybody, but that everybody is also very gossipy about each other. And I suppose gossip is one of the things that does spur writing. Now, you can have gossip in cities, of course, but I'm just saying, like, if you look at the James Joyces and the W.B. Yeatses and people like that, of course, Yeats, you could say, had a country background as well, but particularly just look at Joyce now, very Dublin. And look at Rodney Doyle now, for instance, another very Dublin writer. They, of the Commitments, I'm sure some of you might have seen the film. They are writing from a different milieu. They're writing very brilliant stuff, and they are the canon of Irish writing. I would say the North Kerry writers. There's another. Kerry is a county in the southwest of Ireland, and it's very close to the Irish language, the Gaelic language. We call it Irish, you call it Gaelic. The last Gaelic speaker died in my village in 1927.
Who only spoke Irish?
Oh no, he would have had been a native Irish speaker, but had English. But in Listowel, in the Greater Listowel area, there was a census in Ireland in 1926, and in the Greater Listowel area, there were still people who spoke only Irish in 1926. So we're very close to that as well. We're closer to that in rural Ireland than they are in the cities. And John B Keane famously said that the writing that we do in our area of the country is the love child of Elizabethan English and rural Irish. So that's, I don't know. The other thing I wanted to say was there's another writing tradition in Kerry in the west part of the county. It's in the Irish language, and it started out in the Blasket Islands, where three major books started out the whole thing. One from a woman called Peg Sayers, and one from a man called Thomas O'Crihan, the Island Man, and 20 Years of Growing, Fahibli and a Fought from Irish Sullivan. And that spawned a whole genre of writing. The Blasket Islands were abandoned in 1953, I think. And they now, the Blasket Islanders, such as they are, live on the mainland. But that tradition has spawned a whole tradition of writing in the Irish language as well. So if you look at the county of Kerry, you have two very distinctive traditions of writing and types of writing. You have the North Kerry writing around Listowel, what I call the Listowel literary phenomenon, and then you have in West Kerry the Blasket tradition. And it's very hard to put them into a category of the mainstream of Irish writing. But why should we care? We're still writing. We're there, you know. Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting you bring that up. I think, you know, the Abbey, and you mentioned Yeats and Lady Gregory, and even Sing, like they had that kind of rural mentality, because I think they thought it was sort of the true Ireland, so this Gaelic revival, you know, that they're eulogizing almost the peasant. I will say sometimes it almost seemed like ridiculing in one way, or parodying it, you know, to a rural person. But then, you know, come 1950, the Abbey turned down, you know, John B Keane's plays. And yet, at the same time, John B Keane, you know, who I think is a man ahead of his time in lots of ways, beautifully lyrical writer of plays, and touched on themes that affected people in small towns, but also cities. So like domestic violence, infidelity, pressure to get married, the land, all of these things are universal themes.
Which are relevant to this very day.
Relevant today, and yet not good enough kind of for the intelligentsia in Dublin.
Yeah, well, that's always been the problem. You know, John B, his first play was Sive in 1959. And I'll tell you briefly the story of Sive. John B and his wife went to a play in Listowel in 1958, 59. 58, I'd say it must have been. It was played by Joseph Tomaty, called All Souls Night. And as they were leaving the theatre, well, the hall, you wouldn't call it a theatre, John B said to Mary, you know, his wife, I could write a play as good as that. She said, why don't you? So they had a pub in Listowel. So when the pub was closed, John B had filled himself a pint of beer and sat down with his pen and paper. And by the end of that writing session, early out of the morning, he had the first scene of his first play drafted. When the play was finished, obviously he wanted to go big. And the place to go big at that time, if you were a playwright, was to the Abbey Theatre in Dublin. The Abbey Theatre is called out Irish National Theatre. And the play was sent up to the Abbey Theatre, but John B Keane's wife was like this woman here, a very powerful Kerry woman, and a very intelligent Kerry woman. she stuck slightly, very lightly, the corner of 2 pages of the manuscript together. And the play was rejected. But when Mary opened the play, those 2 pages were still lightly stuck together. They either hadn't read the play in its entirety or hadn't read it at all. But anyway, that's fine. That's the start of the story of John B. He gave the play to his local drama group. Now, we have an amateur drama group culture in Ireland, which is very powerful, right across the country. And every year there's an All-Ireland Drama Festival, final festival in Athlone, in the Dean Crowe Theatre. Athlone is in the centre of the country. And the best of the plays and the best of the play groups are sent up to perform for the Texaco, that's the All-Ireland Trophy. And John B Keane's play won it. And what did he get as his prize? The play was put on in the Abbey Theatre. The critics in Dublin panned him, no, this was backward looking, and they missed the point of the play entirely. But the rural people and the city people, John, that play is still performed in Dublin. The last I heard of it was performed about 2 years ago by the Druid in Dublin, and it filled a theatre in Dublin for 30 nights. Now, that's the power of John B Keane. He's not, there's been very little critical work done about him, although lately there's been a little bit. Brian Devaney has a lovely PhD thesis published about him, and a sister, a nun whose name escapes me, from an American university, wrote a study of him as well. But if you're to write a story of a writer, the writer must be complicated, and the writer, you must have, the critic must have something to earn his or her stripes. You have nothing in John B Keane or myself any fool can read it, and any fool can understand it. You don't have to be told by a PhD what I mean. You'll know yourself, you know. So that's what I think anyway. Yeah.
Well, and it's funny, you know, we're going next week to see the Martin, what's his name? Jesus.
Martin McDonagh?
Yeah, Martin McDonagh, thank you. His new film, The Banshees of Inisheer, in the local Spectrum Theatre here. But he sent a play to the Abbey, I don't know how many years ago, before his trilogy, and they rejected it. And he said to this day, I just read an interview with him the other day, he said he'll never again,
never again.
Because if you're not given that chance, you know, sort of thing, it stifles creativity.
It does, yeah.
But also, you know, there's a kind of wound, I suppose, there. And then he doesn't have to give the Abbey anything now, because who is he, you know?
But the thing I'll say to you about, you know, John B persisting and Martin McDonagh persisting, you know, if you're a real writer, you will persist. If you are not a real writer, you will give up. I can tell you a little anecdote about the great novelist John McGahern. There's every year in Sligo, there's a Yeats summer school, a William Yeats summer school, and McGahern was at it. This must be 30 years ago. And the great bookseller in Sligo at the time was a man called John, doesn't matter. They always called him Mr. anyway. He was Keohane, Mr. Keohane. He was John Keohane, but he was known to everybody as Mr. Keohane. And Mr. Keohane and John McGahern were having a cup of tea at the break in the lectures in the Yeats summer school. And Mr. Keohane asked John McGahern, how would you know if a fellow was a writer? And McGahern thought for a moment. He said, try and stop him. That's it.
So while you mentioned the Irish there and the different kind of tradition, we had Mancon Megan here in April, and he was talking about our losing the language and, you know, what that means, and a kind of a standardized Irish coming out. So as a translator of Irish, I wanted to ask you, Mancon was saying, for instance, like one of the words to do with cattle rearing was there's one Irish word, and the translation is the sound of a cow bereft of her calf. And there's another type of word for just the milking that's done late in the morning. You would let the cow suckle her calf, let her recover, you know, give her a bit of breakfast, and then come back at maybe 10 or 11 and milk her for the family use then. But that word was also used to describe women who had time for a bit of gossip between breakfast and going back, you know, to prepare lunch. And so, you know, it's a kind of to do with leisureliness and timeliness and all this. But he said, you know, we're losing those words, but we're also losing that way of farming, because now it's industrialized. And so what does it mean when you don't have words that are that indicative of the landscape and that descriptive of what you're doing, you know? So how does that affect you as a translator when you're trying to get the nuance that Irish has that English might not have?
I'm lucky insofar as as I said last night and the previous night as well, I was born in 1952 in a small part of rural Ireland where the Irish language had just lately been totally taken over by the English language. But there was a language in the middle. My mother had a good education, so she made damn sure that I spoke the Queen's English. I could speak Irish because I learned it in school, and I was sent back to the Gaeltacht, the Irish speaking part of the county to perfect my Irish. But in between that, there was a dialect, which wasn't fully Irish and wasn't fully English. And they had a whole horde of words that were either purely Irish or adapted from the Irish. So, for instance, there's Brendan Kennedy is a very fine poet, just died this month, last year, from our area as well. And he wrote many poems. But, you know, in Ireland, before the advent of slate or tin or whatever to roof a house, we used to put straw on it. That was called a thatch. And the thatch was held down by a willow rod, which they bent and pointed and fastened the thatch in the straw into the roof with this pointed willow rod, which was called a scallop. So I remember Brendan Kennedy has a poem called the Thatcher, and the first line is, "He whittled scallops for the handy thatch." In other words, he was whittling the scallops to put in the roof. And everybody up to about 30 years ago understood that in my fifth and sixth class. And the day that I knew the whole damn thing was over, one young fella put up his hand and he said, "Gabriel," he said, "why are they putting shellfish on the roof? Scallops." Word gone. You know, word gone. Now, as a translator, I'm lucky insofar as I can get into the kind of the spirit of the thing. Robert Frost famously said that poetry is lost in translation. He's right, Jim. Partly right anyway. But that is only if you slavishly go word for word, and I'm talking about poetry now. If you go word for word, phrase for phrase, sentence for sentence, that can work kind of in a free verse poem. But when you're talking about a formal poem that has a formal rhythm and a formal rhyme, then you have to solve problems, big problems, and you have the way I do it is I say I preserve the sound and the sense of the original poem. Now, if I'm translating a novel or a memoir or a history, I just use the nearest English equivalent. Can I tell you the cultural difference between countries? I translated a big book on the Blasket Islands by Michal de Morga, and there's a phrase in Irish: if you have a great party and it goes on for a few nights, which still happens in rural Ireland, they say, "The an ihagrin er fag 3 law," which I'll translate to as, "We had a great night for 3 days." And the editor of the book was an American, and she said, "Jesus, Gabriel, how can you have a great night for 3 days?" I said, "I'm translating it literally." I said, "And leave it as it is." So sometimes you have just to take the chance, you know. Yeah.
I was going to ask you there too about, let's go back a small bit maybe to discuss the Ireland that you grew up in. And, you know, it was difficult. You said your mom was, you know, sort of invalided. Ireland has a weird dichotomy, I suppose, where even though we were, particularly while you were growing up, I will say, thanks to De Valera, now I'm showing my colours, a very patriarchal, insular, you know, church-led sort of state. And yet at the same time, I would say quite a strong matriarchal tradition, you know, in homes, maybe, or in society.
Yeah.
So how does that tension play out in both in your life, but also in your writing?
Well, I'll tell you a very simple story. As you said, the clergy ruled the country with the Fianna Fáil party, De Valera's party, and the women were very strong. Even though my mother was an invalid, she ruled the roost. And as I say, she was very interested in literature. Now, we had a parish priest in my van when I was about 10. And he was Father Fitzpatrick, a very learned, cultured man. And about that time, Edna O'Brien's first book, The Country Girls, came out. It was a book about women growing up in Ireland and sexuality and all the rest. And it was banned in Ireland. But Father Fitzpatrick was a subscriber to the English Sunday Times. And he read about this book. I don't know how the hell he got the book, but he read it and he was quite convinced it was a good book. So he gave it to my mother for her own second opinion to see was it a good book. And my mother thought it was a good book and she gave it to me to read. So does that answer your question?
So there was, I mean, it's a funny time because there are women locked into mother and baby homes.
Yeah.
And yet there was an open-mindedness, I think, that was sort of hidden, like, you know, the Dance Hall Act of 1935 ends the dancing at the crossroads. So there seems to be always an attack like on rural traditions or this kind of openness that we would have experienced in the countryside that somehow persevered.
Well, it's still going on,
And it's still
I would say,
yeah.
you know, rural Ireland is under severe threat.
Yeah.
As you were saying last night, Elizabeth, there's a hemorrhage from the land to Dublin.
Yeah.
You could say that the real Ireland, the new Ireland is Dublin. There's a ring road around Dublin called the M50. You could say that's where Ireland is, and that everything outside the M50 is forgotten. And unless there's some kind of a political initiative, rural Ireland is going to be finished.
And like they've tried, you know, they had started to decentralize things and, you know, we had built up our universities in Limerick and Galway and Cork, and Shannon Airport, of course, is closed for half the year. Why is not the political will there, actually? Because it can't, like Dublin is bounded by the Irish Sea on the one side. It can go nowhere else, you know.
You see, the youngsters, it's just like in the Blasket Islands. You know, the Blasket Islands were depopulated and they were abandoned in 1953 or thereabouts. But the people left of their own free will. Like, there's nobody forcing the youngsters in your village or your town or my village to leave, but they want to. And if they don't go to Dublin, they're going to Australia. Good luck to them. They're a new generation of people. They're people who are reared with this rather than this. And, you know, it's every new generation has its own challenges. And the old fogies like me are always giving out anyway. So good luck to them. You know, God bless them is all I can say.
But it is, I think, a pity to see some of the, you know, towns closed up or bypassed.
Oh, it is.
And,
it is.
You know.
Yeah, village. COVID had a great effect as well. We had as we were talking about, we had a very severe series of lockdowns during COVID. I'd say it's more severe than you had in this country, and certainly than they had in England. You know, people couldn't go beyond a certain, was it 3 kilometers of their house or something like that, and you couldn't go to a pub, and you couldn't go into a restaurant, you couldn't go into a hotel, and that kind of affected the people as well. And with the result that some small businesses didn't survive the lockdowns. So in a place now where, like Listowel, for instance, now famously Listowel would have had about 70 pubs. There's 40 in there now. But before the lockdown, there wouldn't have been 70. But there might have been 40 pubs in Listowel. And they're now just 14 or 15 pubs. In my own village, there were 5 thriving pubs, and there's only 2. And that is a direct result of COVID.
Well, and that brings us up, if you don't mind, Gabriel, and it's a huge topic, but talk to me about like depression and mental health and even alcohol maybe in Ireland. Like, how are we negotiating that as a country, and how then as an artist do you, like, you know, sometimes you need a bit of maybe lubrication and inspiration and all that.
You need, you know.
But, you know, it might be also stifling for the creativity. So what is that tension like for writers and other artists in Ireland at the moment?
I think there is a notion out there that the Celtic psyche is prone to music and hijinks, to going high and going low. That would certainly be true of Ireland. We're not all a country of manic depressors, don't get me wrong. But there is the Irish have, and I think earned the name of being heavy drinkers. Just like that seems to go with cultures like the Poles as well. Maybe it's a Catholic thing, I don't know. The Protestants in Ireland don't seem to drink as heavily as the Catholics.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And
that's because they get it at the altar.
But one of the ways, look, if you're living in a small community, everybody can see what you're at. And sometimes you can get fed up. And if you go to the pub, which you do, and you're a local school teacher, which I was, they say, look at Fitz, he's going into the pub now. You know, oh, what's this fella? You know, but they never sacked me. And, you know, but I spent a lot of time in pubs. I suppose, to be honest, like Michael Hartnett said that most writers, or did he say the great poet Michael Hartnett said that, I asked him one time on the radio, I said, what about your own neurosis, Michael? And I was only hopping about him. I didn't know that he was alcoholic at the time at all. And he said, Gabriel, he said, all writers are neurotic. And in a sense, maybe writing does come from a sense of a neurosis or a lack in yourself that you have to say.
Yeah.
You have to say yourself. Or if you're a musician, you play yourself. Or if you're a dancer, you dance yourself. Or if you're an artist, you paint or sculpt yourself. There is this our need inside you that most people don't have. And that can be fueled, helped, or destroyed by alcohol. Now, other drugs as well, but look, we won't. I was reared in a culture that had no drugs. The place is full of drugs now, but up to the 1980s, there were really no drugs in small villages like my van. So drugs wouldn't have been an option. Cigarettes would have been, but I never went to cigarettes. But I was fond of the drink, and you can see, and it helped me. Now, I won't say that drink is necessary for writing. There are very many fine writers who never took a drink in their lives. But can I read you a poem actually about drink? It's called "Ode to a Pint of Guinness." I'll find the damn thing now. Keep going there, this will you?
I'll fill in. Well, so John B famously said, I don't know was he serious or not, but one time he was interviewed John B Keane, and he said that he put a hat on the end of the bed, on the bedpost, and he kept drinking until he saw two hats, and then he knew it was time to write. But in fairness, like, he was so lyrically, particularly in his plays, I think, so precise in his language that I doubt, you know, if the poor man ever saw it. But he was fond of a pint as well.
He was.
And a great barman.
As a matter of fact, his wife told him when he gave up the drink, for Christ's sake, go back, and we can't live with you without drink. I find that when I write something, I get down a first draft. And I always have a piece of paper in case the inspiration comes. I will get up in the middle of the night if I get a line or lines. I'll stop my car at the side of the road if I get lines. And I'll write a first draft, and then I will rejig it and redraft it and all the rest, and I'm happy. But then, when I'm pretty sure the poem is finished, I will go down to the pub at some night, I'll drink 5 or 6 pints, and I'll come back. And that will really focus my attention, because I'll take no bullshit when I'm drunk.
Yeah.
I will from other people, but not from
myself.
myself. And this is a poem I wrote about a pint of Guinness. I'm calling it, the first line of it is on Buachail Caol Dubh. That's a song from the 19th century about Guinness. It means the dark, slender boy on Buachail Caol Dubh. And we also call Guinness the blonde in the black skirt. Can you imagine the blonde top? Right. The blonde on Buachail Caol Dubh, the blonde in the black skirt. You have given me life which I'd never have known. For I was a shy one, inward and lonesome, fearful of people the years I was growing. You came to me first in the years I was courting. No girl would stay with me on lemonade. You gave me fine words and a high reputation for romance and laughter. At last I was made. You came to me sad and you came to me happy. There were parts of myself that lay unexplored. But thanks to you, Guinness, there's nothing within us that doesn't come out in thought, deed, or word. There are 2 kinds of truth, one drunk and one sober. The ancient Egyptians knew this very well. Before they'd pronounce, they'd examine it both ways, the kind of good counsel I'd bottle and sell. How different my life would be measured without you. A neckhead, I fear, with his nose in a book. But now I can scan the pulse of my people, and the scholars will read it to get one last look at the village before it has lost its own story, the last place on earth for the wild and the free, ere we turn to designer beers, beautiful bodies, and we speak like bad actors speak on TV. So here's to you, Guinness, muse and confuser. You brought me to visions, you brought me to fat. All the pain that you caused me was nothing at all of. to the knowledge you taught to this once sober heart. That's my answer.
Yeah. You reminded me there, years after the Abbey rejected John B, they gave him a Grodham, which
They
is
did?
an award, and he invited me to go. I was the neighbour's child, of course, and I was up in Dublin at college. So around, I'd say 98 or 99 it was, one of my last years in university, and he, I'm aging myself there, he said, he was there, but Brian Friel was there. And Brian Friel was sat down in the corner, super quiet, and so I'm just thinking about what you said in your poem. Some of these writers are so shy.
Yeah.
And we talked last night about Heaney. Will you talk to us about some of these greats, like international greats that you've met that are either totally unassuming or maybe can be, horrible divas? But Brian Friel did say hello, but she blushed to say hello to me, and I was literally just the neighbour's child,
Yeah, Heaney was a lovely man. I knew him quite well. I met him first of all in 1989 in Louvain in Belgium. We both represented Ireland at the European Festival of Poetry, and he was so normal a fella. Jesus, there was no airs and graces about him. Like, he would just sit down. He could just as easily talk about cows as he talk about rhymes, And we were we were staying in the Irish Institute in Louvain. And there's a pub there, and needless to say, we went to the pub and we had 2 pints of Guinness. And the next thing, 2 pints of Guinness came up out of nowhere. And we were wondering, and suddenly these 2 students came down, 2 girls of about 20. And Seamus, they said, "Are you Seamus Heaney?" He said, "I am." He said, "Did you stand us these 2 pints?" They said, "We did. We're from Derry. We're from," and he said, "Stop," he said, "I'll tell you where you're from." He was able to identify by their accents where they were from Derry. Derry was his own county. On another occasion, Brian McMahon, the great Listowel writer, was doing, when you reach pension age, which is 66 in Ireland, you get a bus pass, you get free travel. You can travel on any kind of public transport free. So Brian was doing a tour of the country, and he wound up in County Wicklow, which is where Seamus Heaney was at the time, in a place called Ashford. And he was just coming off the bus when he saw Seamus coming out of the grocery shop across the way, and Brian shouted out to him, "Seamus," he said, "a lifetime teaching." Brian was a teacher. Seamus, "a lifetime teaching. When have I learned? Life is a mixture of sanctifying grace and diarrhea." And Seamus told me that with great gusto afterwards. And, the great actor Stephen Ray had a column an article in the Irish Times about Seamus, and we tend to think of these great writers as being very austere and very intense and all the rest. He said, "Seamus liked nothing than a good body joke." Yeah.
Well, and you could see, they talked about John B, that his opposite.
But can I just tell you before I finish about Seamus, we used to write to each other. He used to call me Orpheus. And the great booksellers in Galway, Kenny's, they deal in manuscripts and letters and all the rest. And they asked me, "Oh, this is 10, 12 years ago. Did I have any letters from Seamus Heaney?" I said, "I did." They said, "Would I sell them?" Well, I said, "No, not really." But they said, "Look, we need them for Emory University in Atlanta, which is where Heaney's papers are." So I said, "How many do you want?" They said, "Could you give us 25? I said, "I can give you 25. So I sent them off to Kenny's. Guess how much I got for them?
Oh, nothing.
25,000 euros.
Oh my God.
1,000 euros a letter. No, I paid tax in it. So the result that the government got a third of it, the Kenny's got 25% of it, and I got the price of a second-hand car.
Yeah, well,
which was grand.
And you photocopied your letters. So
Yeah. You should, yeah.
I was going to say about John B. We'll open it to questions on my audience, and I do want you to read a few poems. But will you talk to us a little bit? We kind of touched on the church and how it must have been so, or it was so all-encompassing as you were growing up, and particularly as a teacher too, because you kind of answered to the local church, even though it's a state school. Where are you now in terms of spirituality and faith, and where is Ireland now? And you know, we know church attendance is a way back. So
Well, myself personally, I'm still a Catholic. As I was saying last night at dinner, you know, like a Catholic or a Fianna Fáil would have been the biggest party in the country up to recently, in Ireland up to recently. And, you know, you never are quite not a Catholic, and you never are quite not a Fianna Fáil. If you're brought up in that tradition, by jeez, you never forget it, you know. Now, the church is crumbling, not just in Ireland, but everywhere. Now, in some countries, it's growing. That's in the worldwide church. But in Western society, particularly in Europe, the church is as an institution is going to be marginalized completely. But there are still people there who need the faith, and you can have the faith without the institutional church. You know, I do go to mass most of the time anyway, and
there's comfort in the ritual.
there is. But you asked me about teaching. I taught in the Catholic school, and to be honest with you, most schools in Ireland are still run by the church. And there are some independent schools now that don't have church management, and there are Protestant schools as well. But I was well aware that, you know, and I know teachers who were hopeless teachers, alcoholics, and not drug addicts, but alcoholics, and missing school and all the rest. But as long as they were good Catholics, the bishop wouldn't fire them. As long as they were seen to be up there at mass and seen to teach the catechism, their tenure was fairly secure, which was in a sense hypocritical, because they were doing immense damage by not doing their job. I was aware like that the Catholic Church in Ireland sent in a diocesan religion examiner every year to examine Christian doctrine in the school. And like, in a sense, they were all men mainly, and then they sent in nuns when they had a shortage of priests. But they were thought police, like, you know, and
so they were checking religious doctrine, but not the academics.
No, not at all. No.
That is kind of shocking, isn't it? Like,
it is
so pervasive in a way.
Yeah. And like the Catholic Church when I was growing up, it dominated everything. It dominated your sexuality,
your health.
Your health, everything. You couldn't get contraception legally in Ireland until about 1984 or 5, I'd say, you know.
I'd say it was actually later, because I remember when the first supermarket in Estole stocked them, and some people went in and threw them off the shelves.
Really?
Yeah, in Garrett's.
Oh my God, my God.
And before that, if you were a married couple, you could get a doctor's prescription.
That's right, yeah.
So one academic said Irish women had the most highly irregular periods in the world.
Yes.
It was the only way you could get, you know, the pill was to pretend your flow was weird, you know, and only if you were married. So we'll move on to poetry. Now I don't know, was it your quote or what, but when Billy Keane does the theatre, he says poetry is bad enough without it being long too. So the good news is Gabriel doesn't write epic poetry. And then we'll open it to questions after. But I did want us to start with this one, which is a translation. So the Irish was written by a woman, Anya Glynn.
That's right.
And Gabriel translated it. So Gabriel will read the Irish and I'll read the English. And we'll do it stanza by stanza so you can hear the language.
A court.
Yes, exactly, which means a revisiting.
Nuair a tháinig na páistí le bláhanna na huaige, bheithis go raibh aisteach dúis, tú bheith neis ag leocíocht amach orm ó leacht na fanóige.
When the children came home with flowers from your grave, I thought it strange at first to have you back, peering out at me from the windowsill.
Ach tháinig mé isteach díg a níg, is bheithis go ma thuaimhneach de theacht.
But I got used to it by degrees and felt your coming was a peaceful one.
Dí phríostíad hahan na haharathe sa císteannead, nó an raibh an bord níos fearr ta fiad an doras.
I asked you if you liked the changes in the kitchen or if the table was better behind the door.
Doscail tú de fitil, is thuireann an leabhar go dhéann tú manga gáire, is bhí áthas orm go tháinig tú fiú go sealadach.
You opened up your petals and I could have sworn you smiled, and I was glad you had come back even for a while. So there are little nuances there. Like I like that iconic me stacker.
Yeah.
I came into it slowly, you know, instead of but I got used to it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. It's Irish way of saying
but you
things.
have to make Makes sense in English.
It does, yeah.
Yeah,
Will I read a few poems?
please do. Now you know the one I want you to read at the end as well.
I will. Of course I will.
Okay.
I will. Just as we were talking there about the Catholic Church and contraception and all the rest, this is a poem. I won't go too long into it. Chris Christopherson is a friend of mine, the singer. And one time he was in Killarney. I see him several times at his shows. He always invites me back to the green room afterwards. And on one occasion, I invited back an old teacher, a woman well into her 80s, and she caught Christopherson by the lapels, and she asked him to make a song out of her story. He didn't, but I made a poem out of it. It's based in his song. I'm sure you all know it. Help Me Make It Through the Night. The old lady greets Christopherson with, "You must listen to my story, how you helped me make it through the night. I was a married woman with 4 children, and my church decreed it wasn't right to use contraceptives with my husband, so I'd scrub the floors at bedtime till my husband was asleep, and the only company I had, the only help in my plight, was you singing over and over, help me make it through the night. Until once I was in St. Patrick's Purgatory, a penitential island where I went to walk barefoot, hungry, thirsty, that I might learn what my life meant. And in confession to the priest there, I opened heart and soul and told him that we had 4 children, that at nights I scrubbed the floors because the church didn't allow contraceptives, that on my knees till my husband slept, that only then would I cease scrubbing and retire to our marriage bed. I asked him to advise me, but he left me dead. He couldn't help me and my husband, was all he said." So now when you sing that song again, Chris, then I see it in this light, a woman on her knees scrubbing. You helped me make it through the night. And can I tell you that Chris's wife, who always travels with him to his shows, Lisa is her name, she tells me that when Chris sings that song now, she sees it through the old woman's eyes and not through the young man's eyes. Yeah.
Well, and when you were reading it, it reminded me women in Ireland had conjugal duties and men
Yes.
had conjugal rights.
Yes.
And it's
that's
a
right.
very different way of looking at it, isn't it?
And in English law, which was Irish law as well, a man couldn't rape his wife.
Mhm.
They
And
do
that
it-
was true in America, actually.
Yeah,
in
was it?
the
Yeah.
70s. Marital rape, like, didn't exist.
No. Where is my little piece of paper? Where would teachers be without paper? I'm going to read you, I suppose, my most popular poem, 256. It's a poem I wrote for my wife many years ago, and it's gone viral. It's been read. It's probably on the internet someplace. I don't know, but it's been read all over the world at weddings and at funerals and baptisms and birthdays and anniversaries, all that kind of stuff. The last I heard of it, about 2 weeks ago, it was read in Vancouver at a wedding. So here it is. Just to be beside you is enough. Just to make your breakfast, tea and toast. To help you with the wire, that kind of stuff. Just to get the papers in your post. To hold you in my arms in calm embrace. Just to sit beside you with the fire. Just to trace my fingers in your face is more to me than all of youth's desire. Just to lie beside you in the night, to hear you breathe in peace before I sleep, to wake beside you in the morning light, in the love we sow together that we reap. Together we have taken smooth and rough, just to be beside you is enough. Thank you very much. And 246. I keep calling him my son, he's our son. 246. I'm very possessive like that, aren't I? We have 2 children. John is 33 and Nessa is 31. They're both Irish children, both adopted. We adopted John when he was about 9 weeks old, and 2 years later we adopted our daughter Nessa when she was about 11 weeks old. And why did we adopt? Because after at least 8 miscarriages, all at 15 weeks, our doctor told us to stop. We were under the care of some of the top gynecologists and professors in the country. We were being treated as guinea pigs, he said, that they hadn't a clue what was going on. He said to my wife, stop it, he said, you will wreck your health. So Billy O'Connor actually said it to us. And we adopted and we're delighted. So I taught, my wife is a teacher as well, but she taught in a different village. But in our village, I taught our 2 children, and they were both very bright at school. John was particularly good at mathematics, or math as you call it. And when he graduated from high school, he went to college to study mathematics and economics. And one day from college, she rang me with a few pints in from the pub. He said, I don't want to do this anymore, Dad. I said, right, John, what do you want to do? He said, I want to be a chef. The right, John, if you want to be a chef, you change colleges, you go to Tralee, IT Tralee, you go to Allo's in the Stole, the best restaurant around, to get hands-on experience. The rest is history. He's been twice voted one of the top 5 young chefs in the country by Eurotalk Ireland. And he's now the head chef. He no longer he was head chef, and he's now general manager of a very posh restaurant in Rathgar in Dublin. But the amazing thing was that when he was 21, his birth mother wrote to him. Now, why did she write to him when he was 21? She couldn't write to him before that because she didn't know where he was, no more than we knew where she was. But the law stipulated that if the birth mother wanted to contact the child, she could write to the adoption agency who would forward the letter. So they forwarded the letter to John. And John at 21 asked my wife and myself to remind if we met his birth mother. We said, of course not. Turns out that she was very young when she had him, so she married somebody else afterwards. They have 2 boys and 2 girls now, and we're like one big happy family. But the most amazing thing is that his birth grandfather is still alive, and he was the head chef at the Park Hotel in Kenmare. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? Oh yeah, Kenmare, yeah. To my son as he leaves home. Son, just to have you around the house is good. The way you make your presence felt. I'll miss the way that being with you was drink and food. The future beckons. Now it's come to this. You're leaving, son. I wish you all the best. May every good that life can give be yours. Stand firm, love, when life becomes a test. Remember that the good you do endures. You're leaving, son. Take all you need from me. It's freely given as it was when you needed me, a baby on my knee, needed me as to a man you grew. I love you, son. I shed a happy tear as I let you go in hope and faith and fear. And my teaching days, 238. I spent 35 years at the chalk face, and I enjoyed every bit of it. And, you know, in every teacher's career, as you would attest indeed from your time teaching, there is at least one class from hell. And boy, did I meet one.
Only the one.
Only the one, yeah. They'd gone right through the school. The 8 years through the school is impossible. So I was principal teacher of the school. It was the last year before I retired, 2007. So I said, okay, I'll take him. No, I knew that what had been going on before hadn't worked. The old traditional methods of discipline and control were just not going to work. So I said, I'm going to have to change my tack. So I said, I'm going to have to look at these children, and I'm going to have to look at myself as these children see me. I'm going to have to look at the school as these children see me. I'm going to have to show these children that no matter what, I'm on their side. Things will go wrong. When they go wrong, I won't start shouting and screaming. I'll calm things down. And, you know, by and large, we had a good year. So much so that when at the end of the year, one of the boys came up to me and gave me the best compliment I ever got as a teacher. He came up to me and he said, Gabriel, he said, you weren't too bad.
High praise.
So this is it. The only thing you need to know is that a jumbo breakfast roll in Ireland is a roll of bread that you cut in 2. You put butter on it or mayonnaise on it. You put bacon on it, sausage on it, and pudding on it. And the other thing you need to know is the dole in Ireland is social welfare. Money we give out as social welfare to people who are not working. He rises every morning, gets up all alone. No one up to wake him. He does it on his own. No one makes his breakfast. They leave him cash instead. And he goes up to the local shop to be fed. A can of Coca-Cola, a jumbo breakfast roll. That's what he has each morning on his way to school. In school, he gets in trouble in class and out at play. No lessons done, disrupting fun, but he goes there every day. I wonder why he bothers. He could just stay in bed all morning like his parents, but he doesn't. No, instead, he rises every morning, walks up to the school, knowing he'll be in trouble when he acts the fool. He gets up unlike the others. I really don't know why he comes to school each morning, but I admire this boy who rises undefeated while his parents on the dole leave him to his cola and a jumbo breakfast roll. And I just told Liz, and I'll finish with that. Is that okay?
But isn't that the essence of teaching there, to just connect?
Yes.
To have empathy.
No. Pardon?
What was the name of that
A
one
boy
again?
I know. No, I'm looking here at 211. This is referring to the Civil War, the
Irish Civil War.
1922. This is actually after the Civil War. The Civil War was very bitter in Ireland. We needn't go into it too deeply, but there was a party who supported the treaty, the Free State Party, the Free State government, and there were the IRA, or the irregulars, who opposed it, and they fought a very bitter civil war, particularly so in our county, in County Kerry, where men were tied to landmines and blown up and various things, horrible stuff. But one of the things is huge in Kerry is Gaelic football. It's known as the religion of Kerry. And I'm not saying that flippantly, because it helped to heal the wounds of the Civil War. It so happened that some of the protagonists on both sides of the conflict were great footballers. Con Broston from Free State captain, John Joe Sheehy from Tralee, very senior in the IRA, Joe Barrett in Tralee, very senior in the IRA. And in 1924, they were still on the run, the irregulars, because if they were caught, heaven knows what would happen to them. But John Joe Sheehy was on the run somewhere out in County Clare, we think. And there was a major football match being played in Limerick, Kerry against Clare. And Con Brosnan knew that John Joe Sheehy, as centre forward in the team, was vital to Kerry's chances of success. So Ireland, being a small country, as we said, Con Brosnan found out where John Joe Sheehy was. Captain of the Irish Free State Army, sent word to his political and military rival that he would give him safe passage to get into Limerick, to play the match, and to get out afterwards. That's true, and to get out afterwards. So this is called Munster Football Final 1924. Nothing polarizes like a war, and of all wars, a civil war is worst. It takes a century to heal the scars, and even then some names remain accursed. The tragedies of Kerry, open wounds, John Joe Sheehy on the run in 24, the Munster final in the Gaelic grounds. There's something more important here than war. John Joe Sheehy, centre forward, Republican. Con Brosnan, Free State captain, centre field. For what they love, they both put down the gun. On Con safe conduct, Sheehy takes the field. In an hour, the Kerry team will win. Sheehy will vanish on Brosnan's bond again. They're amazing. And then one specially for Elizabeth.
Sorry, I love this book. So
I
we
hope-
need to argue about it.
We did. We did. Where the
I
hell
think
is
he
it?
can handle
Oh, where is it?
in a different book.
No, it's in
Oh,
this
no,
book.
wait,
It's in this book, but I thought I had my no, I find it here in the index. I know exactly where it is. It's called Ballybunion. Now, Ballybunion is a very famous seaside resort in North Kerry, just outside where I come from and where Elizabeth comes from. And it's where the dance halls were when we were growing up.
Finchy famously wrote about it.
She did. And it's where we got our first kiss and our first cuddle. And this is the story of a fella who has a slingshot. We call him catapults in Ireland. And he's breaking windows compulsively in Ballybunion. And he's sent to the psychiatric hospital in Killarney. And the only thing you need to know by way of introduction to Ballybunion is that in the 1960s, semi-literate Kerryman was filling in a form, and there were 3 words at the top of this form. The first word was name. He was able for that. He wrote his name, John Michael Murphy. The second word that appeared on top of the form was born. Thought about that for a while, and he wrote down yes. And the third word that appeared on top of the form was sex. That was easy once in Ballybunion. Anyway, here we are. He had a strange obsession. A catapult is a slingshot, I told you that. He had a strange obsession. With catapult in hand, he went round breaking windows in the village by the strand, Ballybunion. The police there gave him warning they could tolerate no more, yet he went on breaking windows in the village by the shore. So they took him to Killarney from the village by the sea, where they filled him up with tablets and a course of ECT. That fixed him. Well, it should have. But when the doctors asked him what he'd do when he got home, he'd answer with a laugh, I'd get a catapult and I'd break every window in Ballybunion. So they keep him in Killarney, and every month or so when they want to release him, they can't let him go because he always answers with the same old mad refrain. Every time they let him out, his answer is the same. I'll get a catapult and I'll break every window in Ballybunion. The months go by. He's still inside. The downstairs ask him then why every time he's for release, he's kept inside again. So he tells him of his answer, the truth of what he'll do once he's home in Ballybunion. The longstays tell him, you. The next time you ask that question, tell him that you'll get the paper for the horses and you'll put down the odd bet. And tell him you'll go dancing. Then they'll let you out. But if they mention catapults, shut your mouth. Time goes by. He's called again. He's ready this time. And he tells him what he'll do at home in the village by the strand. I'll buy the morning paper and I'll study the horses then. And I'll put down a bet or two. The shrinks cry out, good man. And I go to the dance, he tells him. And I go dancing with a girl. And I take her out in quarter. He said he's in a whirl. Good man, the old man. I'll take her out, he says, and I kiss her. And then I put my hand inside her dress. Good man, the old man. And then what will you do? I'll take the knickers off her. And then what will you do? I'll take the knickers off her. He continues with a shout. I'll take the knickers off her and I'll rip the elastic out. I'll take the knickers off her and I'll do what I've always done. I'll make a catapult to the elastic and I'll break every fucking window in Ballybunion. Thank you very much. Can I dedicate that to your parents, to Damien and Joan and Listowel?
I love that. I just think that has so much. As if betting and womanizing is better, like, you know. So we'll take questions now. If you have our live audience here or anyone online, you can just type in the Q&A feature here, and YouTube, I'll keep an eye on you there. All my parents enjoying the show. Many a good night we had in John B's listening to Gabriel. John Elizabeth for another great show. Thanks, Dad. Greetings from the soul, enjoying it, Kaya. We're loving having you on. So, any questions yourself? Go ahead.
Gabriel, I'm sort of a musician. Play Irish music.
Good man.
Have you ever written a poem that has been converted into a song that we might know?
Yes.
Yes.
Do I
And
have
you
it?
can sing it as well.
Do I have it here? I don't think I published it in this book. Basically, there's a very famous singer in Ireland called Brian Kennedy. And I translated a work of Cathal O'Sharkig from Irish into English. It's called The Count of Dealish, which I called My Black-Haired Love. And obviously, Brian Kennedy saw the book and he made a song out of it. He's very famous. He played with Van Morrison and all people like that. And it charted in England. And of course, like a bloody fool, I know nothing about money or contracts. I signed the contract and I got £1 for it. And when the song charted, I got €25. But there's this corollary to the story. He was with RCA. And when he left RCA did a compilation album of the best of Brian Kennedy. And they had that song in it, My Black-Haired Love, in which it says that Brian Kennedy wrote the lyrics as well as the music. I wrote the lyrics. And I went to my solicitor and I got £1,000 off him. And the album deleted.
Oh.
Yeah. But there's also been other stuff that I've done, poems that I've written for children that have been put to music by Elaine Agnew for kind of classical music. It's with the RTE Symphony Orchestra and stuff like that. So yeah, but I write a few songs as well. And I publish one as a poem here, but I'll sing it for you. It's a parody. I don't know if you know the Irish American songs like Goodbye Johnny Dear and A Mother's Love is a Blessing and all this kind of stuff. And they're very, very, very blatantly sentimental songs. And, you know, anyway, I was taught by Michael Hartley to send up all this stuff to the high moon. So this is my version of a sentimental Irish immigration song. It's kind of sad also in the way. My name is Rudy Doody. doody. From Kill the Booty Beg. I'm 1 week out from Ireland, here in Winnipeg. I'm off to make me fortune in a land beyond the sea. But I'll ne'er forget where'er I roam what me mother said to me. Goodbye, Rudy Doody, off to Winnipeg. Remember Moody Doody in Kill the Booty Beg. Write a letter now and then and send us the few pounds. The more we get, the more we want, till we're 6 foot underground. Then one day a letter came from far off Winnipeg, announcing Rudy Doody to kill the booty bag. He came all rings and byros and boasted in the pub that he could buy the whole damn place and give every man the sub. He spent 3 weeks in Ireland, stood all his mates around, staggered to the butcher shop for the best steak in town. And then the 3 weeks over, he went back home again, and the cock crew in the morning when he boarded on the plane. Meanwhile, back in Ireland, in Kill the Booty Beg, his mates all toast this decent man in far off Winnipeg. But as the years roll onward, he comes back less and less, for the kids at home drink with their own. They don't know who he is. Goodbye, Rudy Doody, off to Winnipeg. Remember Moody Doody in Kill the Booty Beg. Write a letter now and then and send us the few pounds. The more we get, the more we want, till we're 6 foot underground.
That song?
Pardon?
What's
What
the
was
name?
of that song?
The Ballad of Rudy Doody.
Bit irreverent, but
A bit irreverent,
you know,
yeah,
actually a bit
yeah, yeah,
the heartbreak will kill you.
yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Yeah, Chris.
I've heard it said often that one of the things that makes the English language that's spoken in Ireland so musical and so interesting to other English speakers around the world comes from the fact that the transition from Irish to English was very compressed.
Yeah.
And some people have said that as a result, people were transliterated.
They were, yeah.
Speaking English
Yeah.
Irish grammatical
Yeah.
structure.
Yeah.
Do you find that, and is that a help or a hindrance in translation?
It's a help. You still find it in North Kerry today. You know, if I'm in the pub and I'm not speaking this kind of speak, I'm speaking my local dialect, I will say I'm after coming in. In other words, I've just come in. I'm after coming in. That's a literal translation of Tommy Direct today talk this doc. I'm just after coming in. I've just come in. This kind of stuff happens the whole time. And that kind of stuff, that kind of is an extra option for me, because I not only have the English language, which I'm speaking now, kind of, or the Irish language, but I have the one in between as well. And the space between, sure, that's what all literature is, a space between, isn't it? And you're finding a space between languages, a space between the original text and your own new text, a space between the mind of the author and the mind of the translator, and the whole thing is the space between. And I think you're exactly right.
And it is helpful rather than a hindrance.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I still do that sometimes. I'm after eating my dinner.
Oh, yeah,
you know,
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
forget. So yeah, I think guys, there's no questions online, but thank you all for joining us. Oh, sorry, Dan. Mhm.
Kind of follow up on that. So what, in your opinion, what is the future of the Irish language? Is it going to survive?
Yes,
The future of the Irish language.
it is. It is. I'll tell you, I'll be as brief as I can. From 1601, when the Irish were finally defeated by the English, by Queen Elizabeth's force at the Battle of Kinsale, the death of the Irish language has been pronounced in every generation. It is still around. It is still spoken as a first language on the western seaboard of Ireland, and now in the city of Belfast. It's taught in schools, as Elizabeth will say, for some reason, maybe because of bad teaching or bad attitudes to the language, I don't know. But the people, they spend 8 years in primary school and 5 years in high school learning the Irish language, and they're not proficient in it. Now, in the grades they're getting are inflated, they're getting A pluses and all the rest, but that's rubbish. They haven't got the language. They might be able to read it, but as for the point of view of speaking it fluently, forget about it. Now, while that happens, in every village, in every town, in every city in Ireland now, north and south, there are what we call gaelscoileanna, schools where children go to be instructed through the medium of the Irish language, and they are very fluent. My own grandchildren are going to that school. Katie, our eldest grandchild, at 12, is very fluent in the Irish language. It's a different kind of language to the native language spoken in West Kerry, in the Gaeltacht, where it's the first language. It's a school language, but it will survive. But like all languages, every language changes anyway. And, words change. And for instance, the French use the word weekend as a weekend, so why can't we use a few English words in the Irish language as well, So no, I would be very hopeful for the Irish language.
And I think, that is actually borne out even by the diaspora. Like I've become closer to Irish, since leaving, and a lot of Irish Americans are learning it. We said last night, Chinese and Russians are eating the thing up, because it's an unusual language. It's a Hindu root instead of a Romance language, so linguists are interested in it, and it is, thank God, actually very much a living language because we are adapting it, for modern circumstances. So yeah, I agree with you. And I think it's awfully important. Like the longer I live, the more I do agree that you need your language, Tirgan, Changas, Tirgan Anam and all that.
Yeah.
To follow up on that, you say your granddaughter speaks more school Irish. Would you see or foresee then in the coming generations that Irish and Scots Gaelic and Manx and these other languages will start to come together? So
No,
not a chance. No. Scots Gaelic is the strongest of the Celtic languages is Welsh.
Yeah.
They're very strong in Wales. The Manx language is almost completely gone. The Cornish language in Cornwall is almost completely gone. The Breton is still fairly okay in France, in Brittany. Scots Gaelic is kind of okay. Irish language is kind of okay. But as for coming together, I'd say not. They're very different anyway. They're very different. There were two different kinds of Celts. There were P Celts and Q Celts. And we're very close to the Irish Gaelic is very close to Scottish Gaelic. But it's noticeably different. But as for Welsh, Welsh is a different living language entirely, but it's a Celtic language.
Yeah, but by a vowel, Wales.
Yeah.
Lots of W's and L's and R's and F's, So I think that's it. You're all, they're still with us online, but they've no questions. So thank you very much. I thought tonight was only a wide ranging conversation, but that's what we wanted, was just to have an organic kind of chat rather than.
Thanks very much.
And it's great to have, Kerry is well represented. You'd be delighted to know today in the room. There's a lot of our board of Kerry. And Gabriel, thank you very much. It's great to have a neighbour and friend, and taking the stone on the road is brilliant. So
it's been a real pleasure to be here. I want to thank Elizabeth and I want to thank the board for having me. And can I thank you very much for coming, and you also for tuning in on Zoom. Thanks very much. I'm really thrilled. I'm chuffed. Thanks very much.
So Gaurav Mahagut.
Paul
and Slán Wall, everyone.
Gaurav Mahagut.
Take care. Thank you.